Okay, so we have completed the first part of the Python Camel program. We've set up the initial loop and we created a file. Hopefully this next part is not as tricky as it may sound. Since you have worked on a document that was called part 1, we need to create another one that's going to be called part 2. Although it's a separate file, it's still the same program. So let's see how we can do that. I'm going to open up repl.it. That's where I've been working on the first part. Look on the left, it says my repls. So these are the files that I have been working on. I'm going to click on that, and it gives me the stuff that I've worked on so far this semester. I have the chapter 4 notes, the small files that we did for the other exercises, and very importantly, I get a Camel part 1, Camel P1. So unfortunately, there's not a way here to just do a simple copy and paste or duplicate like we do in other programs. And I'm sure that we could fork it. That means that we could separate it into another path. But let's see how this works. If we open up the original one, maybe you already have it open. If you do, great. If not, just open it now. I'm going to click somewhere in the middle of my code, of my main function, and I'm going to press Control A. That selects everything. Then I can right click and copy this. I'm not going to cut it, I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to go back into the icon up here, just a generic icon that I have. Click on it. This brings me back to my account, and I'm going to then be able to click on the blue button on top, say new REPL. I'm sticking with Python, and I'm going to call this, I already forgot what the first one was called. I do believe it's called Camel part 1. It's going to be Camel part 2. If you spelled out part, that's fine. I mean, I'm just making it shorter here. Tell it to create the REPL, and once it opens, in the middle part, the same part where I copied the other code, I'm going to press Control V to paste the code. So my program, the one that is running on the other file, will be running on this new file. This one, however, we will be expanding it. This has the initial loop. It tells me welcome to Camel, etc. Everything we've done so far. And it goes as far as giving me the menu with options. And it should give me the option to quit by typing in even a lowercase q. And let's get going with the rest of the program. So, oh, that blanked out. Okay, well, I see in my notes that I think I called this just P1, and I can edit it to be Camel P2. Doesn't really matter, as long as you can keep track of it. And whenever you turn it in, you send me the URL up here on top. We should be fine. So just like before, I'm going to get more space here by minimizing this a little bit. And while I'm at it, I'm going to open up again the lesson from Read the Docs. We've got as far as, I believe, the 7th step here, where we said, you know, if we put in a lowercase q, you should be able to stop it. We've tested it, etc. So we need to put in some parts of the program now that include variables. That is, you know, we're going to have to keep track of where the camel is, where the natives are, where your enemies are, the strength of the player, the strength of the camel, how much water you have, things like that. And all of these things are going to be stored in variables. So we're going to be creating variables for the distance that the enemy has traveled, and where we are, and where the camel is, and all that stuff. So I'll be reading from my notes back in the program. I'm going to scroll all the way to the top. So even before we say welcome to Camel, I'm on line 1 at the very top. I'm going to press enter a couple of times and then go back up so that I can start to just dump in some variables here. So things that we need to know are the miles that we've traveled. So I'm creating a variable called miles underscore traveled, and saying that there's 0. We haven't gone anywhere. The camel is at rest. the camel is currently not thirsty, so thirst will be equal to 0. The camel is not tired, camel underscore tiredness is also 0. And then the natives to the land, the distance, they are away from us. So I'm going to say that they are minus 20 behind us. All of these numbers, I am not just arbitrarily picking them. They are in the directions. So if you have read the directions, hopefully you're keeping track of why I'm using these numbers. The drinks that I have left in my canteen are 3. So it's not a very big one. This is going to be an integral part of the game. If I can put in this equal signs correctly, there it is. That you have 3 swigs out of the canteen left, so you have to be careful on how many you use, how much water you have. The player also, although the player is riding the camel, the player has not moved either. So the player position is a variable that we need to add. Player, I'll say player POS position is 0, same as the camel. The natives position, we'll say it's 0 as well. They haven't moved, and that's it for the variables. So we have created a variable for the distance the natives have traveled. We set it back to minus 20 miles back. Created a set of initial numbers of drinks. We've done that. Go back to your main program's loop. Okay, so now that we have set up the variables, we need to do some programming here. We have going to add an else if statement. That's what this stands for, else if, to the if statement that is checking the quit command. That means right now in our loop we have the options set up and displayed to the user, and if the user types in Q, then it will quit. But what if the user were to type something else? So if something happens, we need to add an else if statement so that it checks for something else. See if the user is asking for status, for example. So the information that we've given out so far, how much drinks are left, how many drinks are left, how much distance has been traveled, where the natives are, we can give that information to the user. So if it says if the user says what is my status, we're going to tell them well how many miles you travel, how many drinks are left, and how far the natives are behind you. So let's add the else if statement so that we get this kind of information: the miles have been traveled, the drinks in the canteen, and how far behind the natives are. So I'm going to copy this here. You can type it out, and because some of these I'm going to have to delete, for example, the numbers, but I'm going to copy that text, go back to my code. We're going to be adding the else if. It's all within the same area here where we have the if. I'm going to type in enter a couple of times and then backspace so that I'm at the same range as the if statement. Type in else if, ELIF. So else if, because else if something else happens. Let's say that the user underscore choice is equal to, and by that I mean 2 equal signs. We're going to say capital letter E, then do something else. That's where the colon comes in play. I'm going to press enter to go to the next line, and let me put in a remark here real quick. I'm going to say that this is going to give the user a status report. And that remark is the hashtag. So this is just a comment. This is not part of the program. This is just something that's going to allow me to come back later and see, well, what is this supposed to be doing? Well, this is going to be giving us the status report. And that information that I copied, I'm going to paste. I'm going to press Control V so that then it does the printing for me. Print, open parentheses, quote. I'm going to add a n, and that's the backslash. That's the one that's over my enter key in my keyboard, and says that /n, so it's going to give a space down and tell me how many miles were traveled. I don't want it to say 0. This moment I'm going to have a space, quote, and then close the parentheses. I'm going to go to the next line and add print statement there as well. Same thing with the parentheses, quote, and this is displaying way too much help. It's trying to be too helpful, and maybe I should have just typed it out, but like I said, I don't like to type that much, so I'm going to put in the last of that, and I have too many parentheses there, so I have a print parentheses quote /n, so it gives me an extra space, miles traveled colon space. The space is important so it doesn't look all jumbled up. I'm going to add the closing quote and parentheses to the other lines. Now this would only say that much, but we have real numbers. That's why I'm deleting the numbers that were copied and pasted, because we have these variables that we set up at the very top, and I need to be able to display that as I'm printing miles traveled. Well, miles traveled, what does that mean? How many miles have you traveled? Right after the quote, I need to put in a comma, and I'll put in a space, miles underscore traveled. Same thing for the drinks in the canteen. It's going to be a comma followed by drinks. Notice how REPL already knows that we have variables with names, so I don't have to type them in. And then after the last quote, the natives are 10 miles behind you. Well, this 10 actually is, this is where things need to happen. I'm going to replace the 10 with a quote. This is where the quote ends. They are comma miles travel, miles underscore travel, comma behind you. See, miles behind you, right? So I have then natives are comma miles traveled, space quote miles behind you. Now a little bit of math needs to happen here, because it's the miles traveled minus the native's distance. We've already said how many miles we've traveled, but we need to take away the miles, the native's distance. Did I spell that correctly? Natives underscore distance. Keep the comma. So my final statement, print the natives are how many miles have been traveled minus the native's distance, how many miles they've traveled. Take away those extra spaces there, so it's a little bit, maybe a little bit easier to read. I don't know which one would be better. I'll leave the spaces there. Miles traveled minus native's distance, miles behind you. So what else do we need to display? The natives are there. Oh yes, how tired is your camel? So I'm going to print and say your camel tiredness is space, and then after the quote put in a comma and say camel underscore tiredness. So there we have our status display. What can we do with this? Well, we can run it and see what happens. Welcome to Camel, etc. We know that if we type in an A, nothing will happen. We haven't given it directions. I'm not going to type in a Q. I know that it will quit. But what if I type in an E? Well, nothing happens right away, because remember the method that we use so that it would be able to tell between a capital letter and a regular letter. We need to add that to the user choice on the E status as well. So if the user choice dot upper parentheses is equal to uppercase E, then it will give us that. Now this program is still running, so what if I type in a capital E? Then it gives me How many miles have traveled? So far 0. How many drinks in the canteen? Still 3 left. The natives are 20 miles behind you. And your camel tiredness is 0. So it's given us a proper status, and I imagine that the next time that I run it, as I did just now, and I type in just a regular E, it will tell me the same things. We are going to fix up some of these spaces eventually, but right now, let's see what we can do real quick. I see that the 20 miles behind you has extra spaces. So the natives are, I'm gonna need this space right there. I'm gonna delete it. Miles traveled minus the native's distance. I'm going to get rid of the miles, or rather the space before miles, so that these are corrected. And the same thing with the tiredness. I don't need the space after the is. So if I run this again, and I get my status with E, I get that the miles traveled are 0, drinks in canteen are 3, the natives are 20 miles behind you, your camel tiredness is 0. And so now we have set up the function for the letter E. Make sure that you use the proper number of equal signs when you're making decisions with else if. We're going to be adding the rest of them in the following videos, but for now, this is a good stopping point for Camel P2. This is the original Camel program plus the status assignment. Make sure that at the end of the assignment, you give me the link to your part 2, and we'll move on to part 3 in the next video.